our planned maintenance currently stands at 5,379 megawatts, which is about 11.2%. To reiterate the point that I made yesterday, this is for the first time in about 2 decades that we are continuously north of the 10% mark. The only other years where this took place were in 2016 and 2017, and then in 2021 and during the current year. And this is a significant part of the reason why we have this maintenance backlog. We are really dealing with an extensive legacy of under maintenance over, as I said, about 2 decades. We have full load losses unplanned of 8,719, partial load losses of 4,943, for a total of 13,662, which is uncomfortably high. And therefore, bearing in mind a load forecast for evening peak of 29,429, we have a shortfall in generation capacity of 3,518 megawatts, and therefore we had to take a decision late last night to extend load shedding from 5 o'clock this morning to continue at least until Friday, depending, of course, on how the situation changes with units either returning to service from unplanned trips or potential further breakdowns, and of course that risk remains. We had a shutdown at Komati 9 very early this morning at about 4 o'clock. It's a small unit, but still every megawatt counts. Kendall 6, that is a big unit that returned to service at 6 o'clock this morning, so that was very welcome. But we tripped Majuba 6 at just past 8 this morning, so that offset the gain that we got from Kendall 6 returning. Then we also had an interruption at the Apollo substation, where the line from Kahora Bassa enters the Eskom grid just outside of Midrand, and that caused the loss of a further 220 megawatts. We are in the process of repairing that. We anticipate that we should have that return to service by late this afternoon, depending on the severity of the water leak that caused that particular bridge to trip. We also lost 2 units, one each at Grootvlei and one at Camden. Then Medupi 2 tripped at just after 8 last night due to a boiler tube leak. Now, just to give a bit of color to these boiler tube leaks and why they are so difficult to fix. First of all, in a unit, there's about 600 to 800 kilometers. Let me just repeat that, 600 to 800 kilometers. So all the way from here to Durban of boiler tubing. This boiler tube is stacked very close together to ensure that we can get the maximum heat exchange from the coal that we burn in the boiler. And if there is then a boiler tube leak, first of all, you have to wait for the unit to cool down from its supercritical temperature. And then once you have a unit that you can open safely to allow ingress by our maintenance crews, you then, depending on where the leak is located, have to cut your way to where the leak is based. So it is not a simple operation, and it could take 10 days or longer for this boiler tube leak to be repaired. So just to put that into context, boiler tube leaks are a real challenge, and when they occur, they do take units out for an extended period of time. As far as the reserve situation is concerned, we have been able to keep Ankerlig diesel supply stable. We're not currently burning diesel at Ankerlig, so we have about 28 hours left at that. But of course, we have to maintain that reserve in the event that there are further losses of more generation units. We have to keep a buffer in order to prevent an overall system blackout. So that is why we have to keep these reserves as a backup. At Gerikwa, also a reasonably healthy situation. We're currently running 5 units at Gerikwa, and we've got 35 hours of generating capacity with diesel levels sitting at just over 83%. Our pumped storage, we are looking not as good as we would have liked to at Drakensberg. We've got 57 hours of generation and 86 hours to pump. So in order to get to the maximum capacity, we need to pump for 86 hours. And that gives you an indication that there is more work to do to restore that vital part of our reserve capacity to its proper status. We have to recharge that gravity-fed battery, to use a metaphor. In Gula, as I said yesterday, we do have a challenge with both dams being full due to the heavy rain. We've got 24 hours of generation at Ngula, and we have 21 hours to pump. But due to the fact that we have both dams full, the situation is quite difficult to manage. You may be aware that the town of Ladysmith is just downstream of Ngula, and given the extensive flooding that has taken place in KZN, we obviously need to be careful what water we're able to release into the river system in order to protect towns and properties downstream of our Ngula pump storage facility. So we are behaving quite prudently there. As I said, we've got 5 open cycle gas turbines running at the moment. We anticipate that we will require 11 open cycle gas turbines to take us through peak this evening. Again, we appeal to the South African public to please support us by being responsible in how you manage your electricity consumption. It really does make a difference, and it will really help us to protect those emergency reserves. And the sooner we can restore our system and have those backup reserves available, the sooner we can emerge out of load shedding. So there is really a contribution that every South African can make in that regard. We require, in order to provide for any unforeseen events, reserves of about 2,200 megawatts, and therefore we do need to preserve diesel and also maintain our dam levels. We can't simply run them to depletion and take a risk of units, coal-fired units tripping, which would then create a very risky situation for us in terms of the overall grid stability. We, if I can just briefly speak about the situation in KZN, we have done assessment of the Eskom grid, bearing in mind that we supply to municipalities in KZN. By and large, our grid from an Eskom perspective is still intact. We have some minor interruptions, isolated areas where there are short-term interruptions. We have offered our assistance to municipalities in KZN to help with spares, with maintenance crews. Those discussions are ongoing. We are also liaising with the MEC, Mr. Pillay, in order to enable us to coordinate our assistance through the disaster management of KZN. So we're doing everything that we can. We've made an arrangement with eThekwini municipality, and we are not implementing load shedding in eThekwini at this point in time. from a water supply situation. Both the major water supply supply points are located in municipal areas in Umgeni and Ugi. Again, we have reached out to those municipalities and offered our assistance. We can't just go in there and take over their assets. We can only do so with their consent. But we are ready and we are prepared to offer every assistance that we possibly can to help KZN through this very challenging period. Sikonati, I'm going to pause here. I understand that Philip Dukashi, our Group Executive of Generation, is on the call. Philip, I know I've covered most of the territory. Is there anything that I've missed that you would like to add?
Thanks, Andre. Good morning, everyone. Andre, very little. Just to say that another area of discomfort within Generation is the fact that our units at risk, it's high, it's in excess of 11,000 megawatts. So that obviously causes us to, to be uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, because those units can then trip or take themselves out at any stage. We are looking forward to the long weekend because we will use that opportunity to work through as many of these units as possible to try and reduce that risk. And then the last thing is rain has contributed to where we are, the persistent rain that we've had in the country. And we are a little bit worried again with the forecast of rain coming up next week. So we will also use this dry period to try and recover as much as possible in terms of our coal supply. Andre, that's all I would like to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. Let's hand back to Sikonati.
Thank you, gentlemen. My colleagues and the IT team assure me that there is absolutely not a single question on the chat box. So this is bound to be the shortest media briefing on the load shedding. There we go. We just have received one set of questions from Terence Kramer of Engineering News. When will plant maintenance start tapering for winter? How much maintenance will you do on average this winter? When will the winter system outlook briefing take place? Andre, please, can you deal with those?
Sikonati, I think Philip is better placed to answer those questions, and then I think you need to deal with a question on the winter system outlook briefing. That is part of your domain. Philip, please.
So in terms of our planned maintenance, as you can appreciate, we've got a plan that is running throughout this period. And from around May, we are starting to get some of the units that are on planned maintenance, some of the big units. And so from the beginning of May or so, I foresee that we will keep our planned maintenance around 5,000, maybe between 4,800 and 5,000 megawatts at any stage, because we certainly would not like to compromise that. Yeah, Sikonati, I think you can deal with the system outlook briefing. Thanks.
Thank you, Philip. Terence and colleagues, the System Outlook media briefing will be held on the 11th of May 2022. We are very much in preparation for that, and you will in due course receive your invitations. We will indeed present an exhaustive plan. Henry Stedler is asking you, Philip, can you tell us if leave for Eskom maintenance staff and management for the Easter weekend has been cancelled?
So how we deal with this, we know exactly what work needs to be done for each power station during this period. So for those areas, it will not be a blanket approach that says you must cancel all maintenance, because we know this creates a problem, because you back up on maintenance and then people go on forced leave as a result. So for those areas, for those units where work will be taking place, yes, people will be around. We're making plans in fact, as we speak, to make sure that even contractors that are needed will be available. So no, it will not be a blanket approach, but we will certainly ensure that the resources that are needed for the maintenance that needs to be done in these units, those resources are available.
Thank you, Philip. The next question comes from Anton Meyer of Pretoria FM. This is for Sekgomotso Skeepers. Can you provide us with the average amount of electricity that eThekwini uses? Sekgomotso, are you with us?
Thank you, Sikonati. Good morning. Yes, thank you very much for that.
Sekgomotso, please switch on your camera.
Thanks, Sikonati. Can you see me now?
Indeed, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Sikonati. I do not have the precise figure. I think my colleague, Mr. Bala, may be better positioned to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sekgomotso. Sekgomotso is the head of transmission. Anton, I can tell you that eThekwini is the biggest region in KwaZulu-Natal, which is the second largest province in terms of demand on the Eskom system after Gauteng. KwaZulu-Natal consumes about 7,000 megawatts of capacity. Mondebala is not with us on the line. That's why I am answering that question. But I can source the latest figures and make sure you receive that. Thank you very much. The next question comes from Clyde Melinson. How does the current demand for this time of year compare to pre-COVID levels? What is the expected winter peak demand? Sekgomotso, you will answer this one, please, sir.
Yeah, Sikonati, once more, thank you very much. The figures we had for the last winter was around 35,000 megawatts, taking into account the self-dispatch of the renewables. We've had a greater recovery in terms of system demand compared to the previous year. And for the coming winter, I think we are more or less stable. I don't think we're expecting significant growth. When we do provide the system update early May, we'll be able to also articulate this with more precision. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sekgomotso. André de Ruyter, this question is for you from Chris Yeland. Can you advise on the apparent contradiction? DMRE says Cap Powership RMIPP projects will be finalized end April 2022. Eskom says power purchase agreements, it is not ready for signing PPAs for 6 weeks. Environmental and ports authorization not in place, etc. What is the current state of affairs with that contract and all the IPPs, André?
Thank you, Chris. Discussions, as I said, are continuing between the various parties who are involved, DMRE, the IPP office and Eskom. We want to be as collaborative and as cooperative as possible within the confines of trying to look after the best interests of Eskom as an entity. And it remains to be seen whether all of these issues will be resolved in time for the end of April. Again, with regard to questions, as I said yesterday in response to questions from Terence, that we should please direct these questions on other conditions precedent that are really not within the control of Eskom, environmental authorizations, port authorizations, and so forth. Please direct those to the IPP office and to the DMRE. They are best placed to advise on progress made by the various bidders on the RMIPP program to address the outstanding approvals that they still require to proceed with their projects.
Thank you, André. The last set of questions that I do have is Paige Muller from Times Live. Paige, these questions have already been answered this morning, but I will just read them out for you and summarize the answer. Yesterday, you mentioned some substations had flooded. In light of the DA and the EFF's demand that load shedding be ended in KZN, do you have comment? Is it load shedding or flooding in the area? In his opening remarks, Andre said just now that with the eThekwini municipality, Eskom has reached agreement that there will be no load shedding there, and Eskom is indeed working with the disaster management services and the authorities in KwaZulu-Natal, and we are providing all assistance that can be provided to the province. There certainly is no load shedding taking place within the eThekwini municipality boundaries. Thank you so much. The next set of questions comes from Kabi. I do not have your, oh, there you go, Nyokabi Rodriguez from Bulletin. With the current situation with supply capacity, unit breakdowns and the rainy situation, can South Africans expect longer load shedding hours? What is the strategic plan of solving the constant breakdown of power supply units? Are you going to take that, Philip, please? Oh, Andre?
Now, I want to give a bit of context there because I think it's important, again, not to delve back into ancient history, but bear in mind that in 1998, an electricity white paper was published that pointed out that there was a dire and urgent need for new generation capacity to be added to the grid. In 2004, Professor Anton Eberhard wrote a very prescient article in which he said that even though there was no load shedding at the time, based on the pattern in which Eskom was running its power stations in order to meet demand, and based on the amount of maintenance that was being carried out, that there was a very real risk of load shedding in future. And it was actually quite prophetic. If one reads that article today, it's actually quite remarkable how he forecast exactly what then happened. Now, as you know, the decision to proceed with the construction of Medupi and Kusile was only taken in 2007, which is 9 years later than when it should have been. And due to the fact that these power stations were built under an enormous amount of pressure, we were designing the power stations as we were building them. And it's not surprising, therefore, that there were design defects that crept into these projects. And we have therefore had the situation where we have struggled with design defects. These have now by and large been addressed at Medupi. We're in the process of addressing these at Kusile. But to acknowledge that both projects are overspent, late, and did not perform, initially at least, to the required specification. We have also repeatedly stated that we need about 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts of new generation capacity to be added to the grid as soon as possible. And we therefore very pleased to see that the DMRE and the IPP office have proceeded with bid window 5 as well as with bid window 6. We also announced yesterday that we are doing everything from our perspective by making available land in Mpumalanga that Eskom owns for renewable energy projects to be connected to the grid as soon as possible. Now, these are all steps that arguably should have been taken 10 to 15 years ago in order to provide Eskom with the headroom to carry out the required maintenance. The fact that that headroom was not available meant that we were running our units with a ref counter in the red, and we did not do as much of the required maintenance as we were supposed to. And that is why the percentage of planned maintenance that we carried out, that is why I made specific reference to that in my introductory remarks, that we have only seen over the past 20 years, 3 years in which we were able to breach the 10% limit on planned maintenance. If you look at the minimum requirement for maintenance that should have been done on an annual basis, it's closer to 13%. And to be safe, according to global benchmarks, we should actually have taken out 18% on planned maintenance. So the backlog in maintenance has really been a long time coming. And like with any piece of sophisticated mechanical equipment where you do not carry out preventative maintenance, the loans that we took from the future by deferring maintenance and not doing maintenance as we should have, those loans are now falling due, and they are proving very expensive for us to address. The ultimate answer is new capacity additions as soon as possible in order to allow us more headroom to carry out and catch up with the maintenance backlog. Can you please, Philip, add anything to that? If you wish, I just wanted to give that historical context.
Thanks, André. I think that covers quite a lot. But I just want to add that on our side, obviously, we are not giving up. There is still a lot of maintenance that we are doing to try to, given the history, given the issues that we are facing, but to try to have as much of our units available as possible. This is obviously not easy, taking into consideration the lack of maintenance and also the age of our units. But we are doing the best that we can to try and make sure that our units can produce as much as possible with all those constraints that you've already mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you, colleagues. We have Clyde Melanson again. In discussions on the gas-dominated projects in the risk mitigation program, is there a current estimate of the equivalent cost per kilowatt hour given the steep increases in gas prices? Do you have that information, André, please?
Thanks, Sigunati. We should schedule a separate media briefing on the RMI-PPP. It seems there's a significant amount of interest in this. I don't have this number at hand. This is a media conference dealing with load shedding, not with the RMI-PPP.
Thank you. If you send us an email, Clyde, with all your questions on this matter, we will find the correct team to respond to those as soon as we possibly can. Craig Mockel has this to say. Given the diesel supply constraints to the OCGT fleet, what is the status of their conversion to also use gas? Assuming that gas would be cheaper and cleaner than diesel, what constraint is Eskom facing to procure gas, noting that small to mid-scale volumes can be delivered as containerized LNG well before an FSRU plus pipeline can be deployed from the nearest port? I hope I read that well. Again, that's another gas question that I assume you don't have, André?
I can respond to that one, Sikunati. We are intending to approach the market with a request for proposals on the supply of gas to both Ankerlig as well as Gerikwa. We have had the procurement process initiated, and we are in the final throes of being able to prepare that submission to the market, and that should reach the market imminently. We take note of your proposal on containerized LNG. If and when we approach the market, we would encourage bidders to certainly make those offers available to us, particularly having regard to the low load factor that is associated with those OCGTs. It is really quite a challenge to justify expenditure and permanently install FSRU and pipeline infrastructure based on the average load factor that we see for our OCGTs, which makes the situation rather more complicated. Thanks, Craig. Please keep an eye out on our tender portal where you can access this request.
Thank you, André. Peter Atat Montalto of Intellidex has longer-term questions. Does the draft ERA bill now being considered reduce the probability of longer-term load shedding, in particular with the market-forming role it envisages for NTCSA, that is the National Transmission Company South Africa? And is the energy planning role for NTCSA it contemplates sufficiently robust? Sekhumoto, you are head of that transmission company. Will you answer the question for me, please?
Sikwanati, thank you very much. And let me make a contribution on this question. I think in principle, the answer is yes, that the NTSA as a market operator will contribute to higher reliability or security of supply in the country. But we need to just be mindful that it's a complex issue around how we get out of the situation we are in. And clearly a market platform will contribute, but there are other dimensions I think that need to be considered, in particular that we actually require more capacity, and we think this will contribute to that. But there are other aspects such as having an adequate transmission and distribution network, which we are working hard to roll out, as well as ensuring that we have adequate cost-reflective tariffs for the funding of the infrastructure rollout that is required, among other things. So in summary, it will certainly contribute, but it is not a silver bullet. There are other aspects that also require to be attended to, and it is probably a question that we would wish in the future to also explore in more detail with the DMRE. Thank you very much.
Craig again has this to say: when could the market expect the launch of the procurement process for the repurposing or repowering of the 7 coal power plants identified for gas to power? Those include Komati and Grootvlei, I should think. André, we possibly do have Mandy on the line as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer that one, Craig. In fact, we had a discussion on this very topic yesterday. Given the state of Eskom's balance sheet, obviously we need to be quite careful with how we spend capital. And we are currently looking at a variety of different options, including on a similar basis to making available Mpumalanga land, testing the appetite for the market to also install gas turbines at our existing power stations, given the fact that some of them are in quite close proximity to the main gas transmission infrastructure from Mozambique. You'll probably be aware of an LNG project being mooted for the Matola port in Maputo, which could address some of the shortfall expected to arise in the near future from the Panda and Temane gas fields. And this could be an opportunity for either a public-private partnership or for an IPP type of approach using existing infrastructure. There are constraints. There's obviously a loss of about 20% in efficiency on a gas turbine because you run it at altitude, so that militates against the deployment of gas turbines at altitude, then we really need to understand if there are any real benefits other than accelerated grid access by doing a brownfields conversion. Brownfields conversions are typically far more challenging from an engineering and construction perspective, and it remains to be seen what the market response is to either greenfields or brownfields, and we intend to be testing the market on that. Bear in mind also that for any gas-fired project larger than 100 megawatts, and all of them will be larger than 100 megawatts, there will have to be a Section 34 determination, and such a plant will have to be accommodated within the energy planning confines of ILP 19. And there is therefore quite a regulatory road for us to travel before these plants can be either repurposed or can be made available for private investors to use as a base for installing their own merchant gas-fired plants. I trust that that's answered your question. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Andre. That was the last set of questions we have. Anton Meira from Pretoria News, I have some information for you on the eThekwini municipality. Agnes Mlambo, the general manager of distribution in KwaZulu-Natal, tells me that the eThekwini municipality consumes on average 1,600 megawatt hours of power, and there are still 700 megawatt hours out. Eskom is helping the municipality with repairing the towers that fell during the floods, and these will be still off sometimes for some time. So the areas that do not have electricity in the eThekwini municipality are due to damaged infrastructure, which, as Andre did say in his opening remarks, that Eskom is assisting the municipalities in that area, including eThekwini, with repairs to the damaged infrastructure. Just let me repeat the numbers for you. On average, eThekwini consumes 1,600 megawatt hours, and it is 700 megawatt hours due to the damage. That's what they are out on now, or outages. Those were the last questions that we have had. And ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you again for your participation. Let's repeat, we will, as soon as possible, share this recording to everybody, both by email and on WhatsApp. Do you have any closing remarks whatsoever, Andre?
Thanks, Ignati, and thanks, ladies and gentlemen, again for participating in this media briefing. We are working as hard as we can to try and restore supply of electricity, to end load shedding as soon as possible. We will continue to keep you informed and regularly updated for the duration of load shedding, so that you are able to also communicate to your stakeholders and plan your lives as best you can. We again apologize for this interruption to our normal services, and I can give you the assurance that the Eskom teams are working all hours of the day and night to restore electricity supply and end load shedding as soon as we can. Thank you very much.